Hello everyone. This presentation will demonstrate a few strategies highlighting one of the tools of engagement shared in the Digital Tools for Engagement chart for Prince George's County Public Schools. As you might have experienced already, virtual teaching and learning presents different challenges when it comes to student engagement. This presentation will highlight a few strategies to incorporate into content lessons using online tools to get students involved and engaged in the learning process. How do we get them to talk? When integrating technology, think of the strategy or learning goal first, then the technology. For our sample lesson today, we will explore a physical education lesson which will employ the use of engagement tools to achieve the desired learning outcome. We are going to focus on flipping activities for deeper discussion and meeting the needs of all learners using Pear Deck. For the purposes of clarifying this session, we have identified strategies and then grouped them as best examples to use with a given tool. Learning is always at the center, but teachers may utilize any of the above strategies to engage students in learning virtually. Meeting the needs of all learners isn't a strategy, but important to always consider to ensure that we are meeting the needs of all of our learners. Let's get ready to take a deeper dive and look at the use of one core engagement tool to facilitate learning. Today, we will be utilizing Pear Deck. Pear Deck will be utilized to enhance the teaching of a physical education lesson about pacing. Our lesson today is going to involve Pear Deck. Before getting into how to incorporate Pear Deck into an actual lesson, I'm going to first go through an overview of just some of the features that Pear Deck has. Pear Deck is an interactive presentation and lesson delivery tool that enhances Google Slides for teacher-led or student-paced lessons. You can use Pear Deck as kind of like a hub for your Google Slides lessons to go through with your class while you're on Zoom. So when you are sharing your screen, you could have Pear Deck, the teacher dashboard, up, and you could actually be going through Pear Deck with your students. You can also allow your students to put in a website, joinpd.com, put in a code, and then they can have access to the interactive activities that you can put into your lesson, and they can actually do the activities and give you real-time feedback. Pear Deck is also great because students can go through a lesson on their own through the student-paced mode. This is especially good if a student misses your class and you could just give them the link and they could access the Pear Deck and the lesson activities through the Pear Deck link that you share with them. But I'll show you how to do all that in this presentation. First, accessing Pear Deck. Prince George's County Public Schools gives all of its K-12 teachers a premium account to Pear Deck. To access your premium account to Pear Deck, you may have to go to peardeck.com, click on Teacher Login, and sign in with your PGCPS Google account to access your premium account. From there, you can then add it into your Google Slides. On the screen is a 3-step process on how to do that. First, you click on Add-ons, and then you click on Get Add-ons. Next, once you get on the add-on screen, which is the G Suite Marketplace, you type in Pear Deck and you click Install. Once you install it into your Google Slides and you go back to the add-on tab, you will then have the opportunity to click on Pear Deck for Google Slides. So if we're looking at my screen, I have add-ons. I click on that. Since I've already installed Pear Deck for Google Slides, I can then just open Pear Deck and the dashboard comes up on the side of my page. From here, I have the ability to access the template library, which Pear Deck has a lot of pre-made templates that you can just insert into your lessons, or I can manipulate slides that I've already created to ask students questions. So the way this presentation is going to work first is I'm going to basically go through this Google Slides presentation that I made for one of my lessons. So this was made without Pear Deck, and so I'm going to go through and teach you how to add slides that Pear Deck has already created, or add questions to the pre-made slides. Once I go through the entire lesson, I'm going to then come back and show you how it looks in the start lesson mode. So now the lesson starts. My beginning screen of my lesson is my welcome page, just welcoming my students to the physical education class. Then we go into the focus of our lesson. Now something's missing. So I want to add a slide that either asks the students to call on prior knowledge or serves as a social emotional learning check-in. If I want to add a slide that Pear Deck has already created, they have a really robust template library. So I'm going to click on that. This is a really great thing to do when students are waiting for other students to log in, because I know not everyone shows up on time. So you might have like a 2 to 5 or 7 minute period where you're waiting for students to get to your Zoom, get to your class. So a good thing to do is to add in just a bell ringer. So because we are talking about pacing, and pacing is a new concept, I want to call on prior knowledge to see what the students know about pacing already. So Pear Deck has some really good slides on that. I'm going to add in this one. So I'm just going to click this one. And it's going to slide right into my presentation. Now when I start my lesson and my students are going through my Pear Deck with me or on their own through a student-paced lesson, the students are going to be prompted to tell me what they wonder about the concept of pacing. If I want to add in something to call on their social emotional learning, there's slides for that too. So I can do a stress check where students can drag a line telling me just where they are in terms of stress level. And that's also a good way to ask students just how they're doing as a check-in and wait for other students to log into your class. So adding Pear Deck slides into your already pre-made Google Slides presentation is as simple as that. Moving on in our lesson. For this lesson, students will need an open space and water. There's many ways that you can check to see if students have their things that they need for class. You can do like a thumbs up on camera, or you can put it in the chat. But you can also have the students turn this into an interactive slide. So I can make this a draggable slide. I can make this a drawing. I can have them go on the website and explore number, choice, and text. So these are all the ways that you can ask students questions through Pear Deck and make the slide interactive. So for this one, I'm going to make a draggable option where the students have to drag a thumbs up to each one when they're ready. So you can have like a dot. This is how it'll look to the students. You can have a dot. I'm going to add thumbs up, make it a little bit smaller. And I'm going to add another thumbs up so the students can drag their thumbs up to an open space and water when they have it. So at the bottom of our screen, we have our Pear Deck slide bar. This just lets you know that a Pear Deck action has been added to the slide. This is just a lesson overview, so it gives the students just an overview of what we're going to do in our class. For Pear Deck, you can add audio to your slides. So if I want to add an annotation, or I just want to add audio where I'm reading the directions to a slide, I can do that. So I'm going to go to add audio to the slide. And then I can record exactly what the overview is. For our lesson today, number one, we are going to go for a run. Number two, we're going to talk about pacing. What is pacing? How do we know when to pace? The third part of our lesson is going to be our pacing practice, when we're going to ask the question, can you pace for these distances? And then lastly, to finish our lesson, we're going to have our assessment of learning, where we are going to say what we learned for today's class. Once you save that, it'll save it into a audio file where it's going to read back what you said. Then you're going to add audio to the slide so that in Pear Deck, once the students come to this slide, they can go ahead and read what is on, hear what is on the slide, the audio. The next part of our lesson is just our warm-up with the jam in a minute. Part one for our lesson is let's go for a run. We're going to use a video off YouTube to jog in place on a beautiful scenic trail. Make sure you pace yourself. So let's get in that word pace and having the students think about, I wonder what pace means before we actually learn it. This is them going on the run. So after this, I've already added the Pear Deck option in here. This is their rest time. I'm going to start the timer, and they're going to drink water and rest while the timer's on. I could have just had this as a regular rest time, but I wanted to activate thinking. So while the timer is going on Pear Deck, they are going to have a multiple choice question asking, what does it mean to pace yourself? So I have different options where the students can choose what they think it means to pace themselves. We get into the content of our lesson where we talk about pacing. In presentation mode, these come up one by one. So we talk about first pace equals running speed. Then we go down the list to talk about each one of these points about pacing. Our next slide is going to demonstrate the drawing function within Pear Deck. For this slide, I wanted to add in a life example or a real life example of pacing over distance. So I tell the students it is 1.5 miles from the Capitol, which is down here, to the Washington Monument, which is right here. After that, I would ask them to contrast the different points on the map and the different paces needed to travel. In other words, what type of pace would you use to travel from here to the Washington Monument, or from L'Enfant Plaza to the Washington Monument, or from National Gallery of Art down to the capital. I could also make this a drawing tool by having them draw their path that they would run. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. This is going to give them the ability in Pear Deck to draw their own path. And it drops in there just like that, just like that. It is a drawable slide. Pacing practice. We're going to go to pacing practice. And this part of the class just gives them different speeds and distances to manipulate their own pacing. I could make this a choice slide answering this question. So what pace will you use if you're running a 10-second race? Once the students come to this slide in Pear Deck, it'll prompt them to answer that question along with participating along with this video. Next up is our water break. And I've already dropped in a multiple choice question asking them the same thing. This time is a 4-minute virtual run through Paris. Asking them what pace will they use while they run. Assessment of learning. So as an assessment, a written response on what is the definition of pace, just as a review. What determines how fast I run. I'm just going to leave that and use that as a verbal response with the students. Same thing with this one. And my next slide is an opportunity to use the draggable feature. Asking the students, are there any questions you still have about using the appropriate pace depending on distance and time? I'm going to have them drag either if they have a question still, yes or no. This way the students, I can see exactly which student still has a question and maybe respond to them personally. So this is now a draggable slide. And the last slide is their independent activities. I can simply just have them think about which independent activity they're going to do to practice their pace and to reinforce the knowledge that they gained during this lesson about pace. Or I can have them drag a symbol to which independent activity they most want to do or they want to do. So I'm going to make that a star. So the students are going to drag the star to the independent activity that they most want to do. Without Pear Deck, I could have gone through my lesson by sharing my screen, and I could go through my lesson with my students, just teaching what's on the screen. And the students will still be active because there are activities in this lesson where they're warming up with the gym a minute, or they're doing virtual runs, or also doing Wii Sports to practice their pacing. But a great thing about Pear Deck is that it involves the students in the lesson and it keeps them engaged. And so if I am having issues with my students not turning on their cameras, the lesson on Pear Deck is interactive and the students are asked and engaged to do different things, answer questions throughout the lesson. So even if I cannot see my students, I know they're engaged because I'm getting real-time feedback based on them completing the answers in the Google Slides presentation. Another wonderful thing that Pear Deck ensures is that once you close the lesson, it'll prompt you to save the lesson basically. And when you do that, all student responses go to the teacher dashboard. An example of that is on the screen. Whatever question you asked via Pear Deck, whether it was a text question, a drawing question, draggable, any question you ask and the students had to interact with, it'll automatically save it so that you can so you can see the answers that your students came up with, whether to give them feedback, give them a classwork grade. That is a really valuable thing that Pear Deck also gives you. The students are still engaging in the content, and you have evidence of that. What Pear Deck also does is that when you close the lesson, it also sends a copy of your Google Slides presentation along with student responses to the student's email. So there's an option where you can have the students' emails be recorded when they access the lesson. Once they do that, then at the end of the lesson, their responses are sent to them to give them an idea of what their performance was in class. That's also great if you have parent-teacher conferences. It gives you more evidence of student learning and student progress. Now I want to talk to you about how to get the students started on Pear Deck. When you go to start a lesson, it'll prompt you to share the Join PD link with the students. So this can be simply you putting the Join PD link in the chat, you putting the Join PD link in Google Classroom for the students to access before a class, and then once you put that link, once you give students the access to that link, it'll prompt you to share a code. The students will put in the code, and then they will have access to the Pear Deck lesson. So here is an example of how this lesson looks in the teacher dashboard. You go to Start Lesson. Once you start the lesson, it will give you the option of doing a student-paced activity or an instructor-paced activity. Student pace is great for if a student misses your class and they have to access the Pear Deck after class. Instructor pace is when the students cannot advance the presentation without you advancing it. They have no control over advancing it. Only the instructor can advance the Google Slides presentation. So we're going to click on that. It's going to open up. There's that link, joinpd.com, and there is the code. So I'm going to act as a sample student. So the code is XLHEZV. So once I opened up joinpd.com, I typed in that code, and there I am as a sample student connected. You can also click on Give Students the Link, and if you click on Give Students the Link, it copies the clipboard, and you can just plop that link into the chat, and the students do not have to enter any code. It sends them right into your Pear Deck. A question that teachers have with Pear Deck is, how do I get my students to both be on Zoom or Google Meet or Microsoft Teams with me while also accessing Pear Deck? You can put the link inside the chat. The students can then click on the link and it opens up a new browser to put them into your Pear Deck. You can also have the students minimize the Zoom window, so I can just make this smaller. They can open up a browser next to the Zoom window and they can access it then. As a teacher, I really recommend having a second screen. So I have a second monitor that I can both manipulate Pear Deck and also see my students on Zoom. If I don't have a second monitor, I can access Zoom as a browser. So I can just open up Zoom on this tab and go back and forth. Or again, I can minimize this teacher dashboard by either making it smaller or open teacher dashboard. It will come up in a smaller box and I can do it that way. So just a little tip with that. I'm going to start my class. This is what the teacher view is right here. So if I want to share my screen on Zoom and bring up this, I can. But as long as the students have access to the link, this will also come up on their screen. So this is the first prompt that the students will see that I added into our Pear Deck. So as the sample student, I will just put in an answer. And it'll show up right here is 1 of 1 responses. Since I'm the only student in the class, this is the response. So if you have 20 students, it'll show up here 20 of 20. If you want to see the responses real time, you can just click show responses. And this is what I put in as sample student. So it'll show the students' responses real time. You can also lock the screens so that every answer is locked even on the student's screen. So if you want to give them a time limit, you can do that also, of how long they have to answer the question before it locks. Advancing, here's another prompt. So sample student can go ahead and do this and it shows the response. And then as a teacher, I can see the response of my student. I can also view it in list, like that, or as a grid, so I can fit more responses on the screen. Another Pear Deck one. So as I move forward, I'm just going to go through the presentation. This is our drawable one where the students would trace their path through the map to one of our landmarks. It's going to answer the question so that at the end we can see the responses and see how to access those. That's the end of our lesson presentation that the students will see. So as a teacher, I'm just going to end it and I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to say test class number 2. Publish student takeaways. This will publish all the students' answers. So like I said, it could not only give you a copy, but send it to the students. So last thing I want to show you is how to access the student work from Pear Deck. You're going to go right here. This is going to give you the opportunity to send the students their results in their email. So if you don't want this on and you don't want the students to see the results, you just uncheck this. To check the student responses, you are going to review session. So this is the session we just did. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. I'm going to open the dashboard. And once I open the dashboard, it is going to show me my entire lesson presentation. So I'm going to go to the ones that had Pear Deck responses. This was one of them, asking the students to tell me what input activity they most want to do. And you can see the responses right here with the student name. I can view this in different ways. I can have it as a list so I can see the response and the student's name at the bottom. I can leave the student feedback so that when their response is emailed to them, it'll have my feedback along with it. Okay. So as you can see, every Pear Deck response has an answer that you can use for classwork grades or for just general feedback. A really amazing tool that Pear Deck has to offer. I hope this presentation gave you an idea of what you could do with Pear Deck and how you can incorporate it into your lessons to create stronger, more interactive, more engaging student lessons.